Umberto saying hello, good morning, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Umberto. I was just thinking as you joined that we should learn this. We should all learn the sign language for unmute your microphone, which is the most commonly used message on a calls nowadays.
That's a good idea.
You're going to have to help me, Tessa.
Of course. Do you want it to unmute it or to mute it?
It's just that we spend so much time within meetings now reminding people who are already in full flow that they need to unmute their microphones. So some sign language would probably come in really handy.
This is Rachel, and I have top of the hour. Are we ready to begin?
We're just saying, yeah, there's so many advantages to sign language. Did I hear we've now started?
Sure, I have top of the hour at 9 o'clock or 3 o'clock, so we will go ahead and begin. Hello and welcome everyone. My name is Rachel Paul with G3 ICT, and thank you for joining us today for our roundtable discussion. Before we get started, there's just a few guidelines to go over. This roundtable will be recorded and made available to all attendees and participants. We have both closed captioning CART services and international sign language interpretation available. All attendee lines are muted to prevent any background noise or disruptions. And if you would like to ask questions throughout, please use the Q&A box in your menu, and we will get to those. And feel free to use the chat for any technical issues or questions, and myself and the rest of the G3IC team will help monitor those and assist you. You can access the closed captioning by clicking the closed captioning icon on the bottom of your screen. And our interpreter today is Lisa. You can pin her picture so that you always have that. If you click on the 3 dots next to her picture, you will be able to pin that so you always see her. If there's any questions left over, any comments, you can email those to info@smartcitiesforall.org. And I'm happy to turn over today's roundtable to Catherine to get us started. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this webinar. I think that we're going to start with some opening words from our organizers, and I think I'm giving the floor first to James Thurston from G3 ICT, just for some short opening words before we get into the content. Hi, James.
Good afternoon, good morning from Washington, D.C., where I am today. Thank you so much. We're really thrilled to be here as part of this collaborative effort with EDF and Microsoft as well to look at what we think is a really important issue. My nonprofit organization, G3 ICT, was created about 14 years ago, specifically with the mission to promote the digital inclusion of people with disabilities around the world and really help countries implement the technology parts of the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. And really from the start, we had a focus on this issue of procurement, public procurement of accessible ICTs, because we've just seen it be so transformational. So I think it's great, Catherine, that you and Alejandro, who are great to work with, are so focused on this issue, as well as are we in Microsoft. We just know that because governments are such enormous consumers of technology, they can really drive the market and have a huge impact. And so when governments are saying it matters to us that what we buy and what we deploy, importantly, for technology is accessible, that it has a real impact on you. So thanks very much. We're really looking forward to the conversation today.
Thank you very much. And Hector, I give you the floor.
Thank you so much. And thank you to EDF and to G3 ICT for organising this great event today. My name is Hector Binto. I'm the accessibility evangelist within Microsoft for Europe. My role is essentially to build muscle essentially on the topic of accessibility and really raise it up, both within our organization, both within internally at Microsoft and also externally with our customers, many of whom are clearly government customers. At Microsoft, we know that society is digitally transforming, and there's a real opportunity and a responsibility to make sure that it's as inclusive as possible. You know, we've really focused on building accessibility into everything that we do at Microsoft, from our people, our policy, our products, and innovation. We don't want to constantly be chasing back to include people with disabilities in technology. We want the innovation on technology to really include both our employees with disabilities, our customers with disabilities, and the community at large. Now, obviously, that takes a shift of focus. Obviously, we know that compliance is extremely important, but first things first, we have to meet people where they are, which is really the opportunity and the social justice of including people with disabilities in digital societies. Clearly, at the moment, if you think about this work from home culture that we're all facing, what we're noticing is not that this has necessarily only been negative for people with disabilities. We really understand that people are discovering that working remotely, setting up inclusive digital meetings is a skill set, frankly, that many organizations don't have. And we just have to do more to raise awareness about the exclusion of remote working, but the opportunity to design inclusion into it. So rather than seeing this as necessarily being a huge problem, we've really embraced customer engagement on the topic of accessibility through COVID. And what we're finding out is that people really want to know how to do this, how to deliver accessible, but also they're recognizing the real level of disability inside their organizations, including people with hidden disabilities who are having to uncover disability as they've moved to more routine remote working. So yeah, I'm delighted to be here to have this lively discussion about the opportunity and the responsibility of accessibility.
Thank you so much. And Umberto, my colleague from the European Disability Forum, member of our executive committee, I should have actually, I think according to the speakers list, I should have given you the floor first. And I think our interpreter knows that we've just come directly from another webinar together. So I actually was remembering the program in my head at the beginning. So I apologize for getting the order wrong. I believe you're coming to us directly from Italy. So I give you the floor now, Umberto. It's lovely to see you.
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me? Great, great. Good afternoon. Yes, first I'd like to thank the organizers for inviting me to this roundtable discussion in regards to the discrimination and accessibility, because it's an extremely important issue that has been raised now. As you know, I'm here on behalf of the EDF, and we are an umbrella organization representing persons with disabilities before the EU institutions through their active involvement in policy making. And our mission is to ensure that the EU and all of its member states comply with the UN CRPD. Globally, there are roughly US $9.5 trillion is estimated amount spent worldwide on the public procurement market per year on products, services, and infrastructure. In Europe, public procurement amounts to 13.3% of the total GDP. So, and this is in regards to, so if accessibility is considered, and public procurement can be a means to support the inclusion of people with disabilities in all aspects of life, from education to healthcare, traveling, culture, or working in public administration. As you know, accessibility is a precondition for persons with disabilities, and public procurement defines how inclusive countries want to be in Europe. This is why the inclusion of accessibility as a requirement in public procurement is highlighted in the CRPD General Comment number 2 about the CRPD Article 9 concerning accessibility. So that's why at the EU level, EDF advocates for accessibility as a binding criterion in the 2014 Public Procurement Directive. And we have also been active on other initiatives in support of this, such as different European standards, and more recently, the European Accessibility Act, which we expect to impact positively public procurement. However, despite this legal framework, persons with disabilities find in their everyday lives many ICT bought with taxpayers' money which are not accessible to them. Websites, videos with no subtitles or sign language interpretation, self-service terminals in public places which are not accessible, and ICT used internally in the public sector which are not usable by persons with disabilities, and therefore preventing persons with disabilities from working as public servants on equal basis with others. So we believe 3 of the reasons of this remaining problem are: 1 is the lack of understanding of what accessibility means in practice. To solve this, we need more accessibility professionals in the public sector, people who know accessibility from a technical level, who know how to apply the accessibility standards ensuring accessibility. Secondly, there's a lack of an adequate enforcement mechanism. With the Accessibility Act, we will be able to challenge companies, products, and services, but as citizens, we cannot do anything if our public administration creates a new barrier for us. Thirdly, lack of involvement of persons with disabilities in purchase decisions that affects us. As we know, during the COVID-19 crisis, for example, many new learning platforms were put in place for remote schooling. But most of these were never tested with pupils with disabilities beforehand. I'll just wrap up and say, I hope we can finish this discussion with more ideas on how we can progress on this together. And I'm very glad to see leading industry players such as Microsoft to be in line with EDF and the disability movement in this goal. So I'd like to thank Microsoft and G3 ICT for their support and engagement in advocating with us for accessibility and public procurement. So I really would like to say thank you. And thank you once again for giving us the floor. We look forward to working together.
Thank you so much, Umberto. And I have the pleasure now to give the floor to Immaculada Placencio Pereiro. She's a senior expert in disability working at the European Commission in DG Employment. And she's going to tell us everything that we need to know about EU policies on ICT accessibility, including public procurement. Thank you very much for joining us today, Emma. I need your mic on, actually. I think you need to switch on your mic.
Is it now okay?
Perfect, thank you.
Okay, so good afternoon to everybody. I think, Catherine, you're really optimistic that in 10 minutes I need to tell everything you need to know about accessibility, but I will try to at least to give the flavor of what is happening in Europe, focusing with on public procurement. But just to start by saying that at this moment in Europe, we have a very complete ecosystem of accessibility policies and legislation. We have legislation, several pieces that puts obligations on accessibility directly to economic operators, on telecom operators, audiovisual media service providers, even when they are public administrations, like the Web Accessibility Directive. And of course, we have the European Accessibility Act that requires certain products and services to be accessible, and that has a link to public procurement. Let me start by describing briefly what are the key provisions on the Act, on the European Accessibility Act, most relevant for the subject of this conference, and finish then with the public procurement provisions. So the Accessibility Act contains basically two legs, two headings. One is about taking a number of carefully selected products and services, a very strong ICT flavor, computers and operating systems, self-service terminals, terminals used for electronic communication services, basically that's telecommunications, audiovisual media, television, and e-readers, as well as a number of services, electronic communications services, including emergency communications, services providing access to audiovisual media services, certain ICT-related elements of transport, consumer banking services, e-books, and e-commerce. And to those products and services, it requires that they have to be accessible following certain requirements, and they're pretty detailed requirements, and before they are being placed in the market. So from 2025, there will be this obligation. So we have a couple of years to prepare. The other important element, some other important elements that the directive requires is that those who answer emergency communications to the European number 112 will also have to answer in accessible formats. This is pretty new, and it's important for procurement because these normally are public authorities. Now, this is the first leg of the directive. The second leg of the directive, basically what it does, it's rendering operational accessibility obligations that already exist in EU law. For example, funds, some EU funds contain the obligation to respect accessibility when using the funds, but also public procurement. The Public Procurement Directives since last year require to buy accessible. Anything that is going to be used by persons, whether they are members of the staff or of the public, will have to be bought accessible, unless there is a duly justification. But in principle, the departure point is that it has to be bought accessible. So how the Accessibility Act interacts with the Public Procurement Directive is in the following way. For those products and services that I mentioned at the beginning, the accessibility requirements of the Act apply. They are compulsory, and products and services bought will have to comply with those requirements. There is a possibility to add more requirements, especially when the Act does not cover all the aspects of the necessary for the accessibility, but they are mandatory. The requirements of the Accessibility Act are mandatory. When it comes to other products and services that need to be bought accessible, for example, then when using the accessibility requirements of the Act for particular features, elements, or functions, there is a presumption of fulfillment of the obligations of buying accessible provided. Let me give you an example to make this more clear. Imagine I am buying a complete transport service. Then the requirements of the Act for the website, for the provision of information would be compulsory. But imagine that I'm buying a local transport service that is not covered by the European Accessibility Act. Well, then if I use the requirements of the Accessibility Act for the website, for the provision of real-time information, for the ticketing machines, for the check-in machines, payments, then I know that those elements, so specifically those features, elements, or functions, will be presumed to be accessible. But of course, as the Accessibility Act does not contain requirements for vehicles, still the purchasing authority will have to define requirements following other EU law or national law or local law, but they will still have to buy the vehicles accessible. So simplifying a lot, the fact that the website is accessible does not mean that the whole service is accessible, and there should be requirements for that, but those would fall outside this, the European Accessibility Act. Let me tell you that in further defining those requirements, the Accessibility Act allows for the use of standards and technical specifications. Those standards need to follow a process of harmonization, meaning the Commission will have to issue a mandate to the standardization organizations or identify technical specifications, publish a reference in the official journal or taking an implementing act, and then those standards will provide also presumption of conformity. The same standards can be used in the context of public procurement. Let me turn, before I finish, briefly to the main provisions of the Public Procurement Directives that link with the Act. First of all, we have got the Article 42, where technical specifications are required to include accessibility. And this is where it's clear that accessibility is an obligation and has to be taken into account in all the procurement used by natural persons. In addition, we have Article 67 that refers to award criteria. Award criteria is where you decide which of the bids that fulfill the technical requirements are you going to choose. And there is the option of choosing the cheaper, but the directives clearly make the possibility to give extra points and to find a balance between the certain characteristics and the cost. And among those characteristics is the issue of accessibility. So it would be possible to award extra points for accessibility. There are also another set of articles, very important, that refer to the way in which the contract is performed, Article 70, the use of quality assurance standards and labels. In this context, also European standards can be used. And I will give you the reference to the two different standards. One is going to be named a lot throughout this event. And that is the standard on ICT accessibility, EN 301549. That is very well aligned with to a certain extent, with the requirements of the Accessibility Act. In the other standard, which is about performing, how to ensure that your organization performs a contract in ensuring that the outcome is accessible in a disability inclusive manner, following a design for all. And that is EN 17161. I repeat, EN 17161. Those two standards provide a nice technical framework to understand and to require accessibility in public procurement. But let's not forget that standards are voluntary, and that what is compulsory are the requirements of the European Accessibility Act. Those requirements are in Annex 1 of the Accessibility Act, and contains requirements for products, for services, and for emergency communications. There is also Annex 3 that contains requirement to the built environment, and that is also very important in the context of public procurement. I think I've made up my time. I could go on for a while talking about this subject, but I hope to have transmitted to you the main elements of both directives and how they interlink with each other, and I remain available in case you have any questions. Thank you.
This is excellent. Thank you very much, and thank you for remaining available later in case there are questions. I would move immediately now to two experts who are going to give us an update on the current situation. So I have James Thurston from G3 ICT, and I have Alejandro Meledo from EDF. So Alejandro and James, I have here on the program that Alejandro goes first. Is this correct? Is this okay for you guys? Okay, I give Alejandro the floor and then we have James. Thank you both.
Thank you very much, and Catherine. And yeah, we will be basically alternating and kind of passing the floor. So I don't know if we can see the slide. Perfect. I see we see the slide.
I can see it.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah.
So it was natural for G3 ICT and EDF to partner in this because both organizations, we've been advocating for what Imma just explained about ensuring that public procurement incorporates accessibility by default. And we've been doing so in line with, as Umberto mentioned before, with the UNCRPD and the reference in the general comment number 2 about accessibility as public procurement is a driver to accessibility. And with this in mind, we wanted to assess what is the current situation when it comes to accessibility to information and communication technology, and more particularly within public procurement. And we wanted to do so by asking our members, EDF, as Umberto mentioned, we are a big network of disability organizations at European and national level. So we wanted to hear from them their experiences and their perspective on whether public procurers are taking accessibility on board in their purchases. And we also want to know with this survey how we can help the disability movement to move things forward. And I think I will pass the floor to James, and we'll be getting you through all the questions of this survey. James.
Great, thanks so much, Alejandro. And really, from our perspective, it was great to partner with you on this project, because I think it's really important to get the sort of on the ground perspective of your members who are, as we'll see, interested in this topic and working on it. So we asked a short number of questions to EDF members. The results, I think, were pretty interesting, and we can start getting into those right now. One of the first questions we asked is, overall, in your opinion, of the EDF members, what's the overall accessibility level of the ICT that's being procured by public sector bodies where you are? And nearly 80% rated it either low or very low. So really a challenge there, at least in the eyes of EDF members, I think, of the level of accessibility, and ultimately the level of inclusion of people with disabilities in those countries. And you can imagine the enormous impact there is as governments are undergoing a digital transformation, that if the level of accessibility in the technology they're employing, both for their employees internally and also for public services, is low or very low, that it presents a real challenge. Alejandro?
Yeah, I mean, it's clear that this shows that there is still much room for improvement when it comes to accessibility to new technologies. And unfortunately, the digital world is still as inaccessible sometimes as the physical world in which we face many, many barriers. So maybe we can move on to the next slide and the next question, which is question 5, in which we asked our members if they discussed this issue with their governments, if they talk about accessibility of digital technologies. And 80% of them said yes. And that shows that DPOs and the disability movement, we are very much aware of the importance of digitalization and inclusive digitalization and all the possibilities that this could open up for persons with disabilities. I don't know, James, if you want to add something on this. I think it's pretty straightforward.
I was, I think, a little pleasantly surprised, I think, and really encouraged by the level of engagement of your members on this issue in particular. And related to that, we asked if you have been engaged on this, did the situation improve after your discussions with your government about procurement and accessibility? And nearly 70% said that, yeah, the situation actually got better. When the DPOs, when your members are engaged on this topic, the situation improves.
Yeah, I think this is very characteristic of Europe. We have this sometimes reactive approach. So after a complaint, things get fixed because governments in the end care about fixing the problem for their citizens. But most of the times it's always with this ad hoc solution, this alternative solution just for you that lasts for some time until it's totally forgotten. So we actually at European level, we had a similar issue with the website that develops the let's say the European format for your CV. After complaints, it was fixed, but it was fixed as with an alternative website for visually impaired people. So this is the reactive approach that shows that still is not, accessibility is not that, it doesn't come by default yet. So this is what we need to achieve in the coming years. So we can maybe now move to the question number 8, exactly, in which we ask, how aware you are of the 2014 European Public Procurement Directive, and particularly the requirement that accessibility should be considered in this when drafting these technical specifications. And over 60% of our members have some or moderate knowledge about these provisions, and 30% high knowledge. So that proves once again that the disability movement is aware of the legal framework that we are all pushing and trying to change and improve, even though the reality, as we saw before, was different. James?
Yeah, and really congratulations to you, to EDF, to EMA, and to others for over time getting the word out. It's great to see this level of knowledge across Europe. We also asked, how aware are you of national legislation related to public procurement of accessible ICT? And the results were fairly similar, maybe a little bit less aware of national legislation procedures, but still pretty high awareness.
Yeah, it's actually sometimes what I've heard from members is that it's very difficult to grasp, to understand how it works in practice, because actually each country, they have their own system in place. So in this sense, this poses more difficulties, no, to understand the system. But let's move on to the question number 10, in which we ask our members to describe how they perceive the national government's approach to accessibility in public procurement. And we see that around 20% of our members, they perceive that the government has only limited awareness of what ICT accessibility means, and therefore they don't include this in, or very rarely in the internal policies and the processes at national level. Then almost 27%, they acknowledge that the government has some knowledge on accessibility, and they have taken some steps in embracing ICT accessibility. And then similarly, 27% see that there are some systems in place, so some standard processes, policies, and guidelines for accessible public procurement, but these are not used systematically. So again, this is not what I mentioned before. There is not accessibility by default when it comes to public procurement. I don't know, James, if you want to comment on this.
Just briefly, the design of this question was really, as you can tell by looking at the results here, going from left to right, it's an increasing level of commitment and capability on making sure that the government's procurements of technology, of ICT, are accessible. Obviously, we would hope to see more than 4% of national governments always selecting the most accessible solution, and that's really where the work is that we have to do together. We asked previously about knowledge and awareness of legislation. We also asked about EDF members if they know of some of the ICT accessibility standards. Nearly universally, Alejandro, your members knew about WCAG, the Web Accessibility Guidelines. I think quite a bit less about the EN itself.
Yeah, I mean, WCAG has been really an old good friend of the disability movement for many years, and it has been very much used by governments in advancing web accessibility. So that shouldn't come as a surprise. And when it comes to the EN, which in my personal view, I believe is one of, if not the most comprehensive and advanced accessibility standard for ICT, which is freely available. This has been less known because it was only adopted in 2014, and for some years we were not totally happy with some things inside this standard. But now we must say that is totally a norm and technical standard that we must promote, and I believe that in the years to come the EN will become more and more known by the disability movement. After this question, we can also say that we asked about other standards at national level, and our members mentioned some of the translations of WCAG and some of the translation of the EN, or even adaptations as they have in some countries when it comes to WCAG, such as in France, for example, in which they use the RGAA, which is kind of like the French approach to WCAG. James, sorry, is the question 12, yes, in which we ask how willing our members will be to proactively engage in conversations with public sector about the need to consider accessibility. And obviously a very high number, 85%, are interested or very interested in undertaking this campaign, and there is a clear sign of the willingness of the movement of persons with disabilities to ensure that taxpayers' money actually invest in inclusive societies. I don't know, James, if you want to add anything on this.
Just that what we had heard earlier in the survey is that when your members get involved, there's actually an impact. There's improvement. It's great to see this level of interest among your members in staying engaged on procurements. We also asked, and this is the final question, that if your members, if EDF members are interested in reaching out to their government to promote accessibility in procurement, what kinds of supports would be useful to them? And more than half, nearly 60%, said that 3 in particular would be useful, including some sort of toolkit with messaging and talking points on the issue, which would be helpful in approaching different government agencies. Interestingly, I thought partnering with industry and going in together to talk with the government about how they can be doing better on making sure that accessibility is part of their ICT tenders. And then also training and webinars, again, about how to engage, how to talk to, and how to sort of work with the government and push the government really to improve on its approach to procurement.
Exactly. From EDF side, we are very glad to see that the resources and the strategies we use to build our capacity as a movement, such as toolkits that we develop for every legislation that is adopted at European level, guiding our members on the important bits of the legal text. And we have toolkits for some of the directives that Imma mentioned, and very soon we'll have one toolkit about the European Accessibility Act. We are running many webinars such as this one, and we are very proud of partnering with industry such as Microsoft and others on those aspects in which we all together we can really make a difference and have a louder voice. After this question, we also, as any survey, we gave the possibility to add any comment, and I was very happy to see that most of the EDF members, they underline the importance of involving persons with disabilities in public procurement through the representative organization. So again, the motto that has guided us for so many years, nothing about us without us, should also be integrated in public procurement.
Thanks, Alejandro, and thanks for partnering with us on getting this information. I think it really points to an enormous opportunity to be collaborating to move forward on making sure that governments are selecting the most accessible solution as they're investing in technology. Catherine, I think that's the end of this.
That was perfect. Thank you very much, both of you, for that update. It was really interesting how you presented it. And now, before we go to a session, I want to let everyone know there is a question and answer box there, which I'm monitoring. And we will, after the next session, pose questions and they will be answered by the different experts in the room. First, we want to go to a practical experience from Canada. So I have 3 speakers, and I think you coordinate amongst yourselves how and what you present. I have Léa Glickstal, Jules Kuhn, and Patrick Sabarin. And I apologize for my Irish-Belgian pronunciation of all of your names in case you hardly recognized yourself as you were being introduced. So I'm going to give you both the floor for about 15 minutes, and then afterwards we'll have questions and answers that you and our other experts can take.
Perfect, thank you. So I'm going to ask for the members of our accessibility triage team who are on the call to briefly introduce themselves. My name is Léa Glickstal. I am an accessible procurement specialist with the Accessibility, Accommodation, and Adaptive Computer Technology Program, also known as ACT. ACT provides services for people with disabilities across the Government of Canada, including adaptive technology, job accommodation, inclusive design, digital accessibility, conformance testing, user testing, and training services. Patrick?
Hi, everybody. My name is Patrick Sabarin, and I'm a senior policy analyst with our Shared Services Canada's Applied Procurement Policy team in our Procurement and Vendor Relations Directorate. And my group works with technical authorities and contracting authorities to procure ICT goods and services for the Government of Canada.
And I'm Jules Kuhn. I'm an accessibility specialist also with the ACT program, and I'll be presenting the deck today. Quick preview of what we'll be talking about. First, some context on our organization and approach. What is the Government of Canada's direction for accessibility and what policies are in place? What have we communicated to industry so far? And we'll show you some examples of solicitation language that we're using. My colleagues and I work at Shared Services Canada, which is a central department responsible for IT services. As such, we procure most ICT for the Government of Canada. For several years, the ACT team has been promoting EN 301549 for use in procurement activities. Since the update to the standard in 2018, Shared Services has been actively piloting the inclusion of the EN requirements in enterprise procurements, that is, for ICT systems that affect multiple departments. The results of these pilot activities will inform the yet-to-be-developed formal requirements for the Government of Canada, as well as the approaches taken by other departments in the interim. So far, we've included the EN requirements in over 12 enterprise procurements and many non-enterprise as well. We've communicated our approach to over 170 technical authorities and contracting authorities in our department, to other departments and to industry associations. We also have ongoing discussions with other jurisdictions who are implementing accessibility into procurement. This has been extremely helpful to us as we're all dealing with similar problems. We've talked with accessibility specialists from US departments, including the Access Board, from South and West Australia, the Netherlands, the European Commission, thanks EMA, and we continue to reach out to other jurisdictions. One of our first steps was to form an interdisciplinary accessibility triage team. We just introduced ourselves, mixing accessibility, strategy, and procurement expertise in a single functional unit, and this has been very helpful. Our approach is that for enterprise procurements, the triage team meets with both the technical and contracting authorities to discuss requirements as early as possible. For non-enterprise procurements, it's left up to the technical authority to request accessibility assistance. A key factor in actually getting these requirements into the procurements is that we've embedded accessibility into the procurement governance process at Shared Services. And this isn't just a single approval. There are various checkpoints during the process where governance will ask for updates on accessibility. We have more influence on the accessibility requirements within our own department, but we also advise on procurements from other departments. In those cases, we work with their departmental accessibility and procurement units and are just aiming for consistency across departments. What is the current state of the Government of Canada's accessibility strategy, commitments, and guidance? Quick background here. Treasury Board Secretariat is a central agency for our government that, among other things, develops administrative policies for the public service. Currently, the Government of Canada's formal standard is the Treasury Board Web Accessibility Standard, which specifies WCAG 2.0 AA. But this only covers public-facing websites. It doesn't cover other forms of ICT like hardware, software, or documents. It wasn't really designed to be comprehensive. Because we haven't had a standard for our internal websites and applications, many of them aren't fully accessible to public servants. The motivation now is to make ICT accessible not just externally, but also internally to public servants. After all, people with disabilities don't give up their rights when they go to work. The Accessible Canada Act came into effect in July 2019 with unanimous support from Parliament. The goal of the Act is to identify, remove, and prevent barriers in several areas, one of which is ICT. Procurement is a key tool to prevent new barriers in ICT and in other areas. The Act builds on Canada's robust human rights legislation and takes a proactive and inclusive approach to make ICT accessible before complaints occur. Presently, over half of all complaints to the Canadian Human Rights Commission are related to disability. A distinguishing feature of the Act is consistent implementation of accessibility across departments, aiming to avoid the fragmentation that frequently causes issues. The accessibility strategy for the Public Service of Canada is our roadmap for fulfilling the commitments of the Accessible Canada Act. Our goal is to be the most accessible and inclusive public service in the world, inclusive by design and accessible by default. The accessibility strategy was developed with significant input from persons with disabilities and is titled Nothing Without Us. Supporting the goal of hiring 5,000 persons with disabilities in the next 5 years, a key commitment is that all major new ICT systems launched as of 2021 will be accessible, which is quite ambitious. Treasury Board contracting policy was updated in April of last year to prioritize accessibility. All procurements now have to take accessibility requirements into consideration. If accessibility isn't included, there needs to be justification on file. These justifications are specifically limited to trade agreements, comprehensive land claims agreements, or if the authority is unable to obtain goods or services that comply. We can't just state that a product must conform with such and such standard. We also need to ensure that accessibility is delivered on. A new Treasury Board guideline was also released in December 2019. In it, Treasury Board strongly encourages departments to leverage the EN 301-549 in ICT procurements. That includes both internal and public-facing websites, digital content, and the internal applications used by public servants. While the Government of Canada has not formally mandated the use of the EN standard, this guideline signals that we're moving in that direction. So what does this mean for industry? We recently talked with a few industry groups and highlighted the following points. First, why have we chosen to use the EN 301-549? The harmonization with other standards like Section 508 revised and WCAG 2.1 make it easier for industry to meet the requirements. We don't want some bespoke standard that only Canada is asking for, and the EN standard has increasingly widespread adoption. The Government of Canada commissioned studies from academia and consulted with public and private sectors. We consistently heard back that the EN standard was the best choice for us. It's also updated frequently. And I'll note that while it was updated again in 2019, we're sticking with the 2018 version for now. We suggested some next steps for suppliers from our perspective. First is to become familiar with the EN standard and to create accessibility conformance reports in VPAT format that includes the EN standard. VPAT is Voluntary Product Accessibility Template. Due to the harmonization with 508 and WCAG, it can be relatively simple to update existing conformance reports. Next is to prioritize the issues and create an accessibility remediation roadmap, keeping in mind that we might ask for this along with the conformance report in a procurement. Suppliers should watch out for these requirements in upcoming procurements, as accessibility is now a mandatory consideration. It's important to ask questions before the procurement closing, and our accessibility specialists consult with the procurement folks to respond. There may also be requirements for accessible documentation, and this is especially true when the main deliverables are reports or training materials. Now, let's look at some example accessibility requirements. The approach for the statement of work and the evaluation criteria may vary based on what we're buying, the industry readiness, and whether we're looking at a custom development. We may include mandatory and/or rated requirements. For example, often it will be mandatory to submit an accessibility conformance report. If we can't get full accessibility right away, we may require that the product be remediated to meet the standard during the contract. During the evaluation phase, we'll do accessibility testing and identify issues, passing this information back to the supplier. This is good for everyone, as suppliers will end up with a more accessible product at the end of the process. Suppliers may be required to provide workarounds while the product isn't meeting accessibility standards, so that persons with disabilities will still have some level of access in the interim. This is not ideal, but it might include providing personalized support by phone. Another rating scheme may give more points to suppliers who provide a more up-to-date conformance report. So using a VPAT format that includes EN 301-549-2018 would be worth more than using one that only includes WCAG 2.0. A simple and effective approach is to rate the products by their current level of accessibility conformance. But comparing products by scoring the accessibility conformance reports provided by the bidders is challenging. Bidders may have used different VPAT versions, assessed against different standards, or used different methods for testing. And as much as we might ask for these things to be done in a standard way, we may not get that. So for larger procurements, usually we'll do our own conformance testing to ensure a fair comparison. This slide shows an example for a custom development e-learning solution, some clauses that we might include in the statement of work. We specify that all digital components must conform with the relevant EN requirements detailed in some annex, but we also provide some specific examples of what those digital components are. In addition to the learning management system and the course content, we also flag documents provided to students, reports and emails generated from the learning management system or sent by the supplier, product documentation, registration forms. Listing these explicitly makes our expectations clearer than just including the boilerplate "everything must conform" statement. Of course, we'd still need to verify these requirements were met before acceptance. A mandatory evaluation criterion might be simply a declaration stating that the product is either already meeting the accessibility requirements or that it will be brought up to conformance within 24 months of contract award or whatever timeline is appropriate. A rated requirement, again, may give points for providing an accessibility conformance report in certain VPAT formats, or the rating could be based on our own conformance testing. In this example, we're giving half marks for criteria marked as partially supports as defined in VPAT 2.3. As mentioned about this annex, we like to specify a subset of the EN requirements and include them explicitly. Our approach is very much informed by tools such as the requirements generator on the Mandate 376 website or the US accessibility requirements tool. We select the relevant requirements based on the functions the ICT provides and include these requirements in a often quite lengthy document, which also includes the full text of any referenced WCAG criteria, along with some surrounding informative sections. Some versions of this document will include a VPAT-like fillable table, which we'll accept in lieu of a VPAT format report. Other times, we may just include the requirements themselves for brevity. This slide shows an example of the more verbose version of the requirements annex, and it should be familiar if you've seen the Mandate 376 tool. It's in a table format and includes not only the clauses, but also determination of compliance. The idea is to provide as much information to bidders as possible without making them follow links or cross-reference other documents. In conclusion, our approach to implementing accessibility in ICT procurement has a few key features. First, we formed the multidisciplinary team, including representation from accessibility, strategy, and procurement. Second, embedding accessibility into our procurement governance process has really enabled us to get these requirements into real procurements. Third, communicating the approach widely has had a number of benefits. Our contracting and technical authorities know the processes and to come to us for support early on. Being open with other government departments has also allowed us to align our approaches. And finally, building on lessons learned from other jurisdictions has hopefully enabled us to avoid some common pitfalls and proceed with more confidence. A bit of a caveat is that while we've definitely had success getting these requirements into procurements, the overall effect on the accessibility of the procured ICT is still yet to be determined. We're still developing standard processes for what requirements to include in the statement of work and evaluation criteria, and we may not find out how these requirements affect the accessibility for a few years. Ultimately, though, the lessons learned from what we're doing now will better inform the development of future standards for the Government of Canada. Looking forward, we'll continue to engage with other jurisdictions as we all work towards improving ICT accessibility through procurement. Thanks for listening, and please do reach out if you'd like to talk more. Our email is in the slide deck.
Thank you so much. So I think everyone, all of our participants have been really impressed with looking at the thorough approach that you're taking in the Government of Canada. You see also in the chat box, people are making comments and sharing information. I want to take a little break before we go to the expert panel just to pose back some questions which have been raised in the question box. So I would like first, I wonder, Emma, would you be able to take the floor, because there were some very specific questions for you. So the first one is, like, you can answer any, of course, but we have one here which is, how can national procurers integrate the obligation of Article 42 of the Public Procurement Directive in their national processes in a structured manner? And we had another one which looked like for you as well, about whether there would be a special IT unit or task force to support the ones in making their websites and services more accessible. Just pointing to these WC, WCAG, etc., won't be sufficient. Does the EU provide, for example, a white label EU components library accessible and usable for all? And if you see any other questions there that you think you would like to respond to while you have the floor, you're very welcome, Emma. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I think, I mean, all these questions kind of boil down to supporting the processes of buying accessible. And I think that, yeah, I have some information to share with you about it. I mean, it's not that the EU is going to, I mean, to set up at this moment a unit that is going to make sure that member states buy accessible. I mean, this is something that has to happen at member states level. Nevertheless, of course, the Commission will continue to help the process. How do we do that? Okay, so making it more visible. For example, you know that all procurement is going towards e-procurement, and when putting the calls online for procuring, there are a number of fields that refer to accessibility. So basically, accessibility becomes much more visible in these forms, and this helps. The other thing that we are doing is we are finishing together with my colleagues responsible for the Procurement Directive a guide that is the updated version of the previous guide that was called social procurement. And here we are going to have in the guide clear explanations, the links to the standards, and what are all the opportunities beyond the obligations in Article 42 that the directive gives us. Let me also say that I'm really happy to see that Canada is using that the standard, and it is really used more worldwide. When I wrote the mandate in 2005, following the US Access Board regulations, and getting inspired also by the processes there. We didn't know that it was going to be so successful, so it's very good to see it. But let me tell also that I'm happy that the Canada mentioned the use of the toolkit that was developed with the standards, because there, in my view, there are practical examples. It's not complete, does not cover every product, but if you are going to initiate a process of buying procurement, that toolkit that was developed in the first phases of the mandate 376 and the report that provides information about how to use the award criteria, in other words, how to select the most accessible bid that you have among those that comply with the requirements, is going to be very useful. So I really hope that we will be, those guides and the toolkit will be updated in the coming time, because I really believe on the usefulness and functionality of that, now confirmed by Canada. There is one thing that I would like to say about the standards, and that is that the standard will change, or there will be standards upgraded to comply with the requirements of the European Accessibility Act. The Act is more demanding in certain areas than the standard is. Let me give you one example. For example, in the terms of the performance criteria. For the Accessibility Act, those are not, let me put it the other ways. In the standard, what they have is basically user needs. There is language that says user needs this, user needs that. In the Accessibility Act, what it says is technology must perform this way and perform that way, meaning accessible. So in other words, it puts more requirements. So I really would like to invite all of you to look to the Act, to look to the Annex, and be already preparing yourselves, because in the future, then we will have to issue a mandate that will require an update of the standards, and prepare yourselves to use let's say a more demanding standard. So sorry, a long answer for a couple of questions, but I think I have covered most of the issues put there, and I remain available. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Emma. And while you were speaking as well, colleagues are sharing more detailed information as well in the chat from our Zoom. Before moving to the expert panel, I have one question which any of our colleagues from Canada can answer. So this question is, so you're saying that Canada is using city purchasing power to create market demand for accessible and inclusive ICT innovation by requiring accessibility in procurement. Do you require vendors to document their accessibility experience and also require user testing by persons with disabilities? Would any of our colleagues from Canada like to answer this?
Patrick here, I can answer the first part of the question, and Leah, would you mind answering the second? Does that work?
Yeah.
So I just wanted to clarify a quick point to Darren's question. So we're not using city purchasing power per se. We're using the federal government's purchasing power. So that is across all of our provinces and territories. And just to give a quick context, so the Government of Canada is one of the largest public purchasers within our country. Annually, we have a spend of about 22 billion Canadian dollars on goods and services. Our department, Shared Services Canada, our annual procurement spend is about $2 billion. And again, 99% of that is on ICT equipment. So $2 billion is a pretty good chunk of change. And we're trying to use that purchasing power, like you've mentioned, to influence the market, not only on accessibility, but on several other socioeconomic factors that we're trying to pursue. So really, we feel if we're telling industry, hey, you know, if you want a piece of this $2 billion pie, you have to make sure that your products are accessible. They may not be fully accessible right away, but we're sending a clear signal to industry that this change is in motion, and we're hoping within a couple of years that accessible procurement is the norm and not the exception.
Thank you. Leah.
Yes, with regards to the next part of the conversation or the question, do we require vendors to document their accessibility experience? The answer is it depends on the actual procurement, but more and more we are asking in our enterprise procurements, if you can't already meet the accessibility requirements that we're asking you to, give us the roadmap of how you're going to get there within a fixed number of months or period. The second part of requiring users user testing by persons with disabilities, again, it's going to depend on the product. It is a question that we have asked and will continue to ask. It really depends on what it is we're buying. What we're seeing now is our counterpart, our procurement counterpart in the Government of Canada, PSPC, who does the purchasing of all the other non-ICT products. They're doing a lot of research right now in consultations with persons with disabilities that we will help leverage to what we're doing.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your presentation and also for answering the questions. And now I'm going to move to a different expert panel. So I'm going to ask my next set of panelists to turn on their videos if they don't mind. So we have James Thurston from GC ICT. We have Hector Minto, the evangelist from Microsoft, the only evangelist I've had in a webinar today. And we have Donal Rice, who is coming from the Centre for Excellence in Universal Design in Ireland. So I have a few questions for you guys. I will pose the question directly to one of you, but feel free others to jump in if you have got something to contribute. I'm also going to be keeping an eye on the question box to see what comes in that may be interesting for you to answer. So first I'll turn to you, Hector. When it comes to accessible ICT procurement, what does success look like and how will we measure it?
So I really enjoyed what Patrick just said, actually, around how we aim for accessible procurement to be the norm. I mean, so certainly in our experience, good evidence is sporadic. And what I think was to make sure that our teams that are engaging customers are driving the conversation. If you think not just that the Microsoft needs to, or sort of technology world needs to be proactive about accessibility. So we're doing a lot of work actually with our partner networks to make sure that accessibility is even in their vocabulary. I mean, at the moment, we are meeting the employee resource groups, the accessibility experts in public sector procurement, but we're not necessarily having the conversations at the right level. So I think what's interesting here is that we get the volume of the voice of employees with disabilities. I thought that was a really good point earlier, but just making sure that accessibility, that we're doing our bit to improve the readiness of the tech industry to go out there and talk about accessibility.
Thank you very much. And
is my signal breaking?
Your signal was breaking a little bit. Your signal was breaking a little bit. So
I'll work on that.
Yeah, let's see how that goes. Exactly. I think you probably have some skilled people around you in Microsoft who know about the internet. So I'm going to go over to James now to ask what some of the benefits are, both expected and even maybe unexpected, to citizens, to government, and to industry for doing better on accessibility criteria in ICT procurement.
Sure. Catherine, if it's okay, can I just jump a little bit onto the first question? Because
Oh, feel free. Absolutely. Feel free. Go ahead.
It's such a good question. I love that you're starting with a focus on success and measuring success. We do a lot of work with cities, with universities, with national governments around the world, and I think metrics, if you're not measuring it, you're not most likely not doing it. That's our experience on these issues around ICT accessibility around the world. And one of the things that we do on metrics that I think is important and kind of probably pretty relevant with your European audience as well is every other year, ICT does a global survey and analysis that's called the DARE Index, where we look at how well are countries implementing the technology parts of the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. In general, not well, but one in particular, one question that we look at, and it's the survey and analysis includes just about every country that signed on to the UN Convention, which is just about every country in the world. More than half of countries around the world have no procurement policy, nothing like the Procurement Directive, nothing like 508 in the US. So starting off, that's not good. But in terms of metrics, what we also get in this data is that of those countries that actually have a procurement policy, including there in Europe, 0% of them are fully implementing that policy. They may have the policy, but the actual implementation is just not happening fully. Just 2% of the countries that have a procurement policy are substantially implementing the policy. For the most part, countries are just either partially or not at all implementing their procurement policy. So there's a lot of work to be done on measuring progress and looking at that. The other thing that in the work that we do, particularly with, I would say with the work that we do with cities around the world and how they are buying a lot of technology is are you even tracking what % of your RFPs or tenders reference accessibility of your technology tenders? And they don't track that. So there are some really easy metrics that we can be looking at to measure success. So a great question. Thanks for starting with that. On the question around benefits, I'll sort of jump in on this a little bit, and I'm curious to hear what the other panels have to say. But we actually do a lot of training on procurement. I mentioned that we've been working on this issue of ICT and accessibility procurement for many years. And we do a lot of training around the world, in the global north and in the global south. And there are real benefits that we try to start with. First and foremost, obviously the most important benefit is that if you are a government and you are investing in technology and deploying technology assets to support your important activities, then those activities are going to be more inclusive. I mean, that's the biggest benefit. So whether it's transportation systems and you're using technology, or digital payment systems, or obviously education, if you're using accessible technology, all of those are going to be more inclusive for really everyone in your community, including people with disabilities and older persons as well. And I'd like to point out that with that benefit in particular, so many governments are undergoing a dramatic digital transformation. And what we're hearing from our partners around the world is that because of COVID, that digital transformation is just going to accelerate. So you can expect to see more governments using technology more and more. And so the focus on procurement needs to be, on accessibility in procurement needs to be even more intense. And that's just not happening at the rate that we all want it to. Some of the other benefits that we often talk about is around employment. Governments employ a lot of people. They're enormous employers. And we know that governments that have a commitment to procuring accessible technology are actually making the application process for employment with the government more accessible. So people with disabilities have that channel to apply, and making the workplace more accessible. So that if you are a person with a disability, one of the benefits is that if you're getting employed by the government, your office environment, your ability to collaborate with your colleagues and get your work done is going to be better, more accessible if the government is buying accessible technology. And one of the examples that I point to on that is that with the US, which started doing this procurement first, is probably the US federal government is probably one of the best employers of people with disability in the world. And I think there's many reasons for that, but one of the reasons is that they procure accessible technology. So that,
yeah. And it's not only for applicants with disabilities, but if during your life course, your situation changes and you require accessibility measures, your job is still yours, so you can still stay and do your job. I see you're back, Hector. Did you have anything to add there?
I would really like to add something here that I think there's a disconnect, however, between the people who are tasked with getting people with disabilities into work in government and the people responsible for the technology. So you know, if I look at a lot of the engagement I'm having with government departments, I'll meet some amazing organizations really focused on the unemployment rates of people with disabilities, but their knowledge of accessibility and digital inclusion is very low.
Yeah.
So I think there's that. I think part of the task here is to bring these two specialisms together to make sure that they're working on the same agenda.
I know, because overnight with COVID-19, you see most of us are sitting in our houses. We're now working remotely, and our workplace is now a virtual workplace. And so that transformation, and as James said, the scaling up of the public procurement of ICT happened without our expectation. We knew it would happen, but not so fast. Donal, I want to come to you now, if that's okay. If in case you want to respond on any of the other questions, but also if you've seen some good practice in Europe or globally when it comes to requiring accessibility in ICT procurements, any tools you know about, any trainings you know about, any effective implementation strategies.
Sure, Catherine, thank you very much. And I suppose, you know, the good practice is use the standards. That's, I think, the message here. You know, whether it's the Section 508 standard, the EN 301549, it's use the standard, use it in the way that it was designed to be used. That's a bit of a simplistic answer, because you can include the standard as a reference in your procurement request for tender, but then how do you assess the effectiveness of the responses from respondees? And you know, amazing listening to our Canadian colleagues who have actually tried to address accessibility and procurement right along the different links in the chain. So what I am seeing, based in Ireland and in working with some of my colleagues around Europe, certainly, is that awareness is very high. It's up a lot more than what it was to be, but still the implementation can falter. But just one good example from Ireland, we're working in the centre with Alone, which is a national charity for older people, and they're doing a systems demonstrator at the moment on putting telehealth and telecare systems in place, with the view that our national health service system is going to look at this project and implement a national program around telehealth and telecare equipment. Now we're working with them on developing guidelines for the health service. But what we're doing really is we're not just telling them use the standard, we're getting them to look at what are the experiences of older people in using these commercial off-the-shelf products like smartphones, like various sensors around the house. What's their experience? Because while the standard gives us a baseline, there's lots of opportunities to be able to build in an award criteria, for example, and how a tender is written, to build in experience of people actually using the technology. So I think that's a really good example of a potential and an up and coming good practice, where we're not just looking at using the standards, but also in writing a government specification potentially for this type of technology. What have to date been the experiences of people in using that technology? And I suppose in terms of tools, Catherine, we've already mentioned, Ema has mentioned, and Jules mentioned the Mandate 376 toolkit. So it's not the easiest URL to remember. It's mandate376.standards.eu. And what we tried to produce there was something that would provide advice for public procurers right across the steps of procurement, from market research to writing the tender, evaluating tenders, and contract management. And particularly for commercial off-the-shelf products, that's a very useful toolkit to have. And in terms of training and supports, I suppose there's quite a lot of guidance out there. G3 ICT produced a model accessibility report with the ITU a number of years ago that has a chapter on public procurement in it. I know that the ITU Academy have got some trainings on public procurement, and I know at the moment they're translating those into French, Spain, and Arabic. So that's going to be of interest to people outside of English-speaking countries for sure. So I think there is still a lot that could be done in terms of raising awareness and assisting procurers in I suppose understanding what accessibility is and also how to buy accessible.
So thank you very much, Donal. I'm going to just draw attention to one of the questions in the chat box, and I'm going to ask my colleague Alejandro to pick it up later in the next session. Sufyan from Inclusion Europe has asked about whether the information in this webinar will be made accessible and easy to read. So this is something, Sufyan, I see your question and we will definitely answer your question, but I won't answer it immediately, but we will, Alejandro will come back. So one last thing, Donal, you referred to the project Alone in Ireland and the going to this national program you have. Do you see for accessibility and ICT public procurement, do you see a role for persons with disabilities? Do you see a role for older people, how they can be involved in this?
Yeah, I mean, Alejandro, I think already mentioned, you know, nothing about us without us, and that's not just a politically correct statement. I mean, how can you buy and procure devices, whether it's technology or any other sort of device for people, unless you know how they use them and their experience of using them? So I think, you know, the first thing that any procurement officer, any procurement office, any organization ought to do is just to assess what have been the experiences of people using the technology that has been procured to date, and where have the barriers and the difficulties been, and who better to ask than the people who are using it. You know, I don't want to give a trite answer and say absolutely in every step of the process, because you know, some of this gets very technical. We have the standards, which are the baseline, and you know, I think realistically expectations would not be that persons with disabilities can assess conformity with these very technical standards. That wouldn't be probably realistic. But I think, you know, user testing and the possibility to use samples, test samples, because again, we must remember the baseline is the standard is a baseline. EMA never intended this to be the ceiling, okay, when it comes to accessibility. It's the baseline. There's other ways to build in the requirements that people with disabilities need based on, you know, their experience, based on dialogue with them, in things like award criteria, so we can specify accessibility requirements that are maybe particular to the people in your organization or your country. So again, there are, but you know, across many of the steps of procurement, but it depends on exactly what it is that you want to achieve.
Thank you very much.
Sorry, Catherine. One other thing on that, because I thought of it while I was thinking about this session, and it isn't quite related to your question, but it's related to procurement overall. The involvement of persons with disabilities in standards is critical here. I mean, EMA used the word presumption of conformity. Now, that's a legal term to say the standard is the legal way to assess conformity with someone meeting their requirements around the procurement directives, the Act, the Accessibility Act, etc. But these standards are being developed in standards bodies, which are not government committees. They're not run by public bodies. They're run by standards bodies. And it can be, and this is my experience and my research has shown that it can be very, quite a barrier for persons with disabilities to become involved in these standards processes. And these standards, we must remember, are becoming regulation. They're not just standards for industry, they're standards for everyone. So the involvement of persons with disabilities in standards development is quite a challenge. And it's quite a challenge for us here in Ireland at our national level, our national committees, to get persons with disabilities involved. But it's quite a challenge at European level, where these standards, such as EN 301549, tend to be developed. So that's the involvement of persons with disabilities in standards is something we should remember and keep an eye on.
Thank you. And can I thank the participants who are all crowdsourcing the answers there in the chat box and providing the links to for example, the resources available from G3 ICT and others, because you're all doing my job for me, which I really appreciate. I saw that James was looking for the floor to answer, and then I go to you, Hector. And then I've got a question there coming in on skills training in Europe that I might pass back to Emma, if that's okay, but I go first to James and then Hector.
Sure, I'd love to touch on both of those last two questions just a little bit. And Donal listed some great resources, and there's some really fantastic activity in the chat as well. In terms of good practices or best practices, I tend to say good practices. I think it's we're lucky at this point in time to be able to look sort of at history, at countries or other governments who have tried this. The US being the first with Section 508, and really see sort of what mistakes they've made and what good practices they've developed as a result. It was fantastic to hear the Canadians talking about what they're doing, and what an amazing process that you guys have developed to think about in a very conscious way about how do we want to approach this, what do we need for supports. And I think from the US experience, a few things that I would point to that I think are important to success. I think one of the reasons why we see in our data around the world that, and we saw in the survey data, Catherine, that we did with EDF, that adopting a policy is one thing, actually implementing it is another thing, is these supports. So things like, as Donal was saying, tools, even simple things like templates for tenders, sample RFP language for tenders are things. Because I used to work in the US federal government and did a lot of work with our procurement people. They're procuring all kinds of things with all kinds of different needs. And so whatever we can do to help them do a better job in focusing on accessibility as required would be great. Another good practice I think that evolved here in the US was over time, they actually developed a community of practice within the government of people who are working on these issues. In the US, they're called Section 508 coordinators. They get together, they build guides, they build tools, they interact with industry, with disabled persons organizations. So they're really building up a community of practice and skills and knowledge and awareness within the government employees who are working on this, which I think over time has been critical. And there I would throw in that one of the parts of G3 ICT, we manage the International Association for Accessibility Professionals, IAAP, and which is a professional society for people who have accessibility as all of or part of their job or are interested in it. And we've actually started and will be accelerating the work on creating a new certification on procurement, accessibility and procurement, that will start accelerating in 2021 as well. So really getting those supports to people to make it embed it in their job, I think is critically important. And just quickly on the last question, Catherine, about involving and engaging people with disabilities in this process, certainly having them involved in defining a policy is critical. But I think where we've seen successful procurements of technology and technology deployments, we've seen them involved in that process as well, including in defining even tenders, but certainly in testing as part of the process and engaging them there so that you know, and I point to often, we do a lot of work with smart cities that are deploying technology. And two sort of opposite examples of procurement that worked well and one that unfortunately did not. Around something we in the US called digital 311 systems. It's ways of engaging with your community in a city to get information from them, from citizens and community members, and push information out to them. The city of Chicago has a new, actually award-winning digital 311 system that's completely or very fully accessible. But they, from the very beginning of designing that system and subcontracting out to vendors to develop it, embedded people with disabilities in the process. And so it really is a good example of one of those.
So from the beginning, from the blank page right to the end.
Right, and unfortunately we have an example of a large city, I won't say which one, in Mexico, which has a great digital 311 system from a technology perspective, but completely not accessible.
Okay.
A real missed opportunity.
Okay, thank you very much, James. Hector, how is your internet connection? Have you taken all your children off the internet?
I have. Am I coming across loud and clear? That's great. Yeah, I'm glad I was on mute when I was talking to my children. You did not need to hear that. So I think there's a couple of things I just want to kind of come in on that I thought were really interesting. There's a couple of trend that I'm seeing. There's the confidence of employees to ask for accessible. You know, that is an issue. So if we look at some of the work we've done within our product, you can now request accessible documentation in email, right? And it's an automated part of your email profile. You know, you can actually tick a box that says, I prefer accessible content. So we're seeing a lot more people learning about this feature and raising the awareness that accessible is even a thing internally at the workplace. So that empowers people with disabilities in the workplace to you know, it raises their voice, I would say, about their requirements. I think there's another thing that you should be aware of. There's this trend of citizen developers. So we're democratizing the build of tools in the workplace. So if we look at things like the Microsoft Power Platform, it has an accessibility checker built into it. But the whole concept there is that you build your own in-work apps. And I think there's something here we can have a think about where people with disabilities start creating their own apps in the workplace that are accessible by design and then socializing them through the workplace. But equally, as we move to a world where more people can write their own technology, you know, build their own apps in the workplace, we need to really focus on making sure that those are accessible, because otherwise we will end up with tools in the workplace built internally that are not accessible. So this internal muscle versus this procurement conversation are all parts of the jigsaw here.
Yeah, thank you very much for coming to that. Now I'm going to go back because you've mentioned something that really requires, and your connection is perfect now. We hear and saw you loud and clear. Emma, could you come in on the question of skills training in the EU, which was one of the questions raised? Because all of what we're talking about does require skills training of developers, but also of everybody who's using technology.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yes. Well, it is clear that skills shortage in this area is an issue, and what I wanted to share, I shared in the chat a link to a document. Is the next plans. I mean, it's a plan for the coming years at a European level called the European Skills Agenda for Sustainable Competitiveness, Social Fairness and Resilience. And it is a document that sets out what's going to be the next priorities in the EU for training on skills. And one of the things is, for the first time, I mean, it's reflected in the section related to the built environment, but it's also related to digitalization and so forth. And what it says is that now, well, as recovery starts, upskilling needs, there are shortages in energy, in resources, in digitalization, and also in compliance with accessibility. So this is something that is coming. There is going to be possibilities for supporting the sector in this area to train and upskill on accessibility requirements and competencies. Let me also say that there was a question, if I can take advantage of this, about the mandate and the participation of persons with disabilities in employment. The mandate is a request that the Commission does to the European standardization organizations, asking, please develop a standard, or please could you provide us an update of a particular standard that is, in this case, linked with legislation. I can assure you that the draft mandate will be shared with persons with disabilities and other stakeholders. This is now part of the normal process. And I'm really very keen to have persons with disabilities to participate in the process. And as the Accessibility Act contains some specific requirements addressing the needs of persons or accessibility for persons with intellectual disabilities, this would be a very relevant point to get feedback. And my last point is a plea, if I may, Catherine, abusing your generosity with the time, which is, I mean, more and more, as we raise awareness in Europe, and I'm talking about the European Commission, but also with our contractors and so forth, about the accessibility, they want, and also taking into account this distributing, authoring, you know, people are doing tools, apps, as Hector was saying, developing websites, applications, and so forth. People want to have support, and not only to check whether what they did was accessible, but really, they tell me, well, listen, this is too complex for me. I really don't want to bother on how to make accessible. Can't I put my authoring tool, my editor, my program, just to give me a mode in which I know, or is supporting me, that my outcome is going to be accessible. So really, this is I want to transmit this to the industry that is there. I've said it before, it's not the first time, but I think the day that we would have a tool in which you are asked at the beginning, or you can put a setting, I want my document to be accessible whatever happens, and I will be asked on the different process how to do it, that would really be of help and will facilitate the outcome. Sorry, just to abusing your time. Thank you.
And as soon as you asked that question, things started to appear in the chat box, which were part of the solution testing tools. You, stimulated by a question, Hector was adding some things, but we know that as technology evolves, and as it's more disseminated and dispersed, and there's more citizen designing and development, that these things will become even more important, and also the involvement of people with disabilities. Now, we have still, before closing, about 10 minutes. I wanted to see, before coming back to James, Donal and Hector on any final comments on the topics we talked about, to see if any of the other, Emma, you answered some questions already. I don't know if our team from Canada were provoked by any of the questions which were asked, to give your perspective from your direct experience. I don't think so. I think is somebody turning on their mic there? That's okay. It's fine. I just wanted to see, because some of the questions are probably on things that you have dealt with already. Now, there was another very interesting question in the question box, which mentioned James, but I also think it's very relevant for Hector and Donal to respond to. Emma, when she was describing the legislation, she talked about the accessibility criterion, but also the possibility of having accessibility as a competitive advantage. And somebody has asked if it has ever been used to challenge a public procurement decision. For example, has a business said, you chose that one and that's not accessible, but our one was accessible and you did not choose us? Has this been used in competition yet? Donal, has it, as far as you know?
Not in this country, not in Ireland, but I know that it has in under federal procurement regulations in the United States, and that's a very, I suppose, similar system to what we have, but it's a very regulated system.
Yeah.
And for very, very big contracts, so the stakes are quite high. The federal procurement regulations have been in place for over 20 years, so there's quite a lot of support within federal agencies. They would have Section 508 officers, so challenges absolutely can and do have. However, our procurement guidance and the Mandate 376 toolkit would suggest that if someone has provided an inaccessible product before, saying it was accessible, that there would be the possibility to preclude them from entering into a procurement process again. So we have the possibility to exclude vendors and suppliers who have submitted false information around accessibility. So I haven't seen this side of the water being challenged. Certainly in the United States, companies have challenged either because they were accessible and they saw that an inaccessible company got the tender, or where the federal procurement agencies have just dismissed someone.
Recognized it. Perfect.
From being in a process.
Thank you very much, Donal. James, what do you think?
Yeah. So Donal is, as always, exactly right. There are, I think, some examples. I wouldn't say, from what I know in the U.S. experience, a lot of examples of lawsuits, but I do know of one in the more accessible solution, which was, I believe, more costly for that tender, ultimately was selected through some sort of a process. But again, I don't think it's an everyday occurrence, and maybe others can chime in the chat. But I like the question, the idea of competitive advantage. I think one of the things that we've seen over time, because of laws like the Procurement Directive and Section 508, is you see, and this is where Hector in particular may want to jump in, the companies competing based on the innovation and accessibility of their products and their solutions. Which is exactly one of the benefits you want from a policy like this. And I was running a week-long meeting last week using collaboration software with a big university here in the US. And literally why we were using that solution, it actually happened to be Teams. There was an announcement about some new accessibility features that were being included in Teams in the near future. So seeing that sort of back and forth, I think is exactly what we want from procurement policies like this.
Hector.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to focus on that competitive advantage angle as a proactive conversation. You know, I think that's a measure of the maturity that we're now reaching on the conversation around accessibility, because human beings rely on technology so much more. I mean, the social value of providing accessible technology is the conversation where we think we really should be aiming for, especially for emerging technologies like artificial intelligence, right? You know, we've got to make sure that we see this as an opportunity and really race after it, you know, with inclusion in mind. I mean, I'm not aware of, and it's not really my part of Microsoft, I would say, in terms of bid protests or any of that sort of thing. But one thing I might mention is when leaders start to understand the needs of accessibility, they start challenging some of the tools that they already have within their organization. And leaders have the decisions to think about where they're going with their technology strategy. I think the tactic that I'm constantly working on in terms of my evangelism, and thanks for mentioning that earlier, Catherine, it is actually reaching people higher up in the organization to talk about accessibility, where you start to see people who have real decision-making capability start to influence current decisions and future decisions. So yeah, I always like to focus on the opportunity, I would say, there.
And I suppose the competitive advantage gives you that opening with people up at the highest level in every company.
Exactly. Yeah, and you know,
yeah.
the people who buy technology and influence the purchasing of technology is evolving. It's moving beyond the IT teams. HR teams now care about the technology that are there. Yes. Diversity and inclusion leads care about the technology that they have, right? Because they're trying to achieve their targets in terms of diversity targets, or you know, HR are thinking about how do they make sure that they're creating an equally opportunistic workplace. Yes. So I would say here that the leaders come in many shapes and forms, you know, beyond IT.
Yeah. And that as something that has been raised at many points during the discussion we've had, the connectivity, the fact that ICT procurement underpins most of the ways of functioning of organizations, both public but also private, and especially now today when we are together in a room that maybe a year ago we would have only thought to have this event if we could be all together somewhere. We would be at the Conference of States Parties in New York, or we would be in Brussels. And now we foresee and plan these things remotely from different places, and we want to be fully accessible. Now, thank you very much for the ongoing conversation in the chat. I'm about to finish, but I want to see, because 2 questions were raised by questioners, and I want to see if any of the panelists want to speak to that. Questions were asked about accessibility for deaf-blind people, so who are experiencing multiple sensory barriers, and also people with intellectual disabilities. So what do the standards have to say there, and what is the future of public procurement accessibility that would also enable people with intellectual disabilities and deaf-blind people and other more marginalized people from being able to use the ICT procured? Who would like to try with that one? Hector.
Yeah, I'm happy to come in just briefly there. So on the deaf-blind conversation, obviously we now have full Braille support across Windows, and in terms of a standard, you know, we're working across industry, or we have worked across industry to make sure that Braille conformance is becoming an industry standard, a standard HID standard. So people need to know that that's there, yeah, and come to us and make sure that actually if they find things that are not working well, that they're using our disability answer desk to flag to us. And we also have what's called an accessibility user voice to bring specific scenarios to the forefront in our engineers' thought processes. On the second point, what was that, Catherine? The easy read. Yeah, so there's an interesting thing here. We have a tool called the immersive reader, which means that actually now you can convert websites and documents into what we call the immersive reader, which was focused on dyslexia at first, but has actually moved beyond that into foreign language conversion and symbol support for documents. So full symbol support is now built into our text experience now. That tool is actually available for everyone to build into their own technology. It's available in the cloud. So in terms of how our strategy towards easy read or easy read equivalent, I know it's not the same thing, is to start looking at intelligent ways to automate that process in the cloud.
Okay, very good, thank you. Do you have any other, do any of the other speakers want to say anything on that topic? From our Canadian experts? James, I see you have your mic off.
Can you hear me okay? I think my internet's getting a little spotty.
Yeah, it's a little bit spotty,
Yes.
as you said.
I'll type some comment. I don't even have children to blame it on, but I'll type some comments in the chat.
Perfect, thank you. So if nobody else wants to answer on that, we've got, oh, perfect, Emma, go ahead.
Yes, no, just to say that we have some very specific requirements in the Accessibility Act to document information to be, for example, understandable, easy to be used, the navigation consistent. There are some requirements that respond really to the needs already of persons with intellectual disabilities. We know that W3C is also working on the development of more requirements for accessibility, and I really think it's a subject that is happening now, and in the execution of the mandate for the Act, we will have possibilities to address that matter, and we are really very keen on that.
Thank you. So at that, I would like to thank all of the panelists who I had the pleasure there to discuss with and to ask questions to. Because my job is now coming to an end, and I'm giving back the microphone to Alejandro and to James, who are going to talk about next steps and to close. So thank you very much, everyone, for the great conversation.
Thank you very much, Catherine. Can you hear me well? Yeah.
Perfectly.
Okay, good. So I don't know if James will be able to jump in, but I can say from the EDF side that we'll keep on working on this front on including accessibility in public procurement. Obviously, the most pressing piece of work for us and for our members is the transposition of the European Accessibility Act, for which, as I mentioned before, we will soon publish a toolkit with recommendations and guidance to our members on how to engage with conversations with their governments at national level and how to transpose, how to adapt the national legislation in line with the European Accessibility Act. And obviously the link that Imma explained with public procurement will be very present in our materials and our webinars and so forth. Also in relation with the Accessibility Act as well, we will keep on working very intensively in the development of the standards that will be in support of this legislation, such as the EN 301549 that we've been mentioning quite often in this webinar. And as EDF, we always try to be as active as possible, despite the difficulties of our European standardization system, to bring the voice of persons with disabilities and all our members into the standardization work in support of legislation. Something very important that Inma has mentioned, and it was not on our radar up till now, was this e-procurement, which I learned about it only some days ago. And I believe that from the disability movement, we'll need to promote this form, and sorry, and the use of this form, and particularly the aspect of, I mean, the elements of the form that relates to ensuring accessibility when drafting technical specification, and all the potential that we've been explaining about the award criteria, accessibility as a competitive advantage, and so forth, and more professionals, accessibility professionals in public procurement. Same goes for the guide that the Commission prepares on public procurement, the social public procurement, in which accessibility and the standards that we've been talking about will be there. So it's also will be our mission to promote and raise awareness about these available tools. And well, looking at the futures, as EDF, we are now advocating very strongly for a new agency, the EU Access Board, that could also support this work at national level, with experts, with research, with training to procurers to comply with the different accessibility legislation that we got adopted recently. And as a follow-up of this webinar, I can say that if the circumstances allow, we'll organize, if we have the means and the opportunity, a workshop in our board meeting in Berlin in autumn, in which we will dive into how we can engage, as our members expressed in the survey, how can we engage in conversation with national governments to raise this point and to ensure that the public procurement will become more inclusive. In that workshop, we will obviously try to web stream it and to record it somehow, so we kind of collect all the necessary materials for our members to facilitate their work in this campaign, which shouldn't stop in the coming years, definitely. And I don't know if James is there and he would like to add something. James, are you there?
I am here, and you can let me know if it's working okay. I turned off my video, but yeah,
we hear you well.
Okay, great. Let me just add maybe a few things. First, Catherine and Alejandro, Umberto, thank you so much for the partnership on this event. We look forward to continuing to work with you on this issue, which I think we all, including with our partners from Microsoft, think is incredibly important and impactful, most importantly, that it really does drive inclusion from a technology perspective. So for us moving forward, what we'll be doing is absolutely maintaining our commitment to this issue area, to this opportunity around ICT and procurement, not just in Europe, but around the world. We mentioned a lot of resources. Hopefully my colleague Julia is also typing in some links and resources, as well as maybe an email address where you can get in touch with us. We actually have an entire web portal focused on this issue. You can reach that at ICT for all. There's a variety of resources there for governments that are interested in either adopting a procurement policy or more effectively implementing their procurement policy. I mentioned that IAAP will remain focused on this issue and be accelerating its work on creating training and certification on accessible ICT procurement in 2021. Procurement is always a focus of our annual M-Enabling Summit. Typically that's here in Washington. We also have a version in Europe. It'll be digital this year in September, and there'll be some discussion of procurement there. But I think moving forward, one of the things that was encouraging to me about what we've heard in this chat, but even in the survey that we did with EDF, is that the disabled persons organizations, civil society, really seem to want to learn about how they can be more effective at advocating for procurement. And so I think there's some opportunities there in terms of next steps, and we would certainly be open to exploring those with not just partners here in Europe, but also we've got organizations from around the world, and think about what are some ways to support more effectiveness in engaging your governments in country. The other thing that I really liked in the survey data, which again I think is an opportunity for us in collaboration around partnering with industry and civil society together to have these conversations with government. And I think that's an enormous opportunity that we should be taking advantage of. And we're certainly open to exploring that as well with participants here and obviously with EDF as well. So I'll leave it there, Catherine and Alejandro. And again, thank you and Microsoft for working together on this.
And thank you to you and D3ACT colleagues and Microsoft for organizing this event with us as well.
So I think that we are ready to close. Alejandro, am I right? And James, yes. So I think we just need to, we've already been thanking the organizers, but I would like to especially thank Ferdinand and Lisa, who have been doing a marathon this afternoon because they were working on a previous EDF event as well. Something which is only possible because they're still sitting on the same couch. So thank you very much also for Captioner, and also to all of our speakers, to our Canadian colleagues, to Emma coming from the European Commission, and to all of you especially who did all of this crowdsourcing of answers in the chat box. I believe we're able to collect all of it. And there was one question which we will come back to you on, Sufyan, on easy to read, on information about this topic in easy to read. So myself and Alejandro will come back to you separately on this. So, and thank you very much to Rachel, I think, who's been setting up our technology and organization today. And I hope that we see each other sometime soon physically in person. Bye-bye. There's also a question that we didn't answer on external cooperation, but I'm asking the questioner to send it to me by email because there are references to accessibility in the guidelines for EDF or for EU external cooperation, but we'll try and answer that properly via email afterwards. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Take care, everyone. Bye.
Thanks all.
So have a good rest of the day, everyone.
You too. Thank you.
Bye,
No,
Lisa.
I'll go and let my kids back on the internet now. Sorry about that at the start.
That's okay. No, but like it's amazing how we've had to turn our homes into offices and also school rooms and everything. It's actually, I think it's worked out in many cases better than we expected, but yeah.
I'm now an expert on available channels on a router. I never knew anything about it previously.
Oh, I don't know anything about it.
I can run a workshop on it, how to maximize your broadband.
Oh yeah, no, I don't know anything about this. Listen, thank you very much. Rachel, are you still there? Was everything okay from your side? I think you're probably stopping recording.
I'll capture the chat, and I will send over the recording and the transcript.
Great. What Sufyan was asking for easy to read, we'll discuss with him because I'm not sure. I think probably, could we stop recording?
Yes, I'm going to do that.
Yeah.